Hello everyone and welcome to today's session. Thank you for joining. We'll begin the presentation in just around about 5 minutes time. Thank you. Hi everyone, thank you for joining the session today. We're just going to start in 1 minute's time. Thank you. Okay. Hello everyone and welcome to today's session. My name is Tom Lynham and I am the PPM Product Manager here at Excelcius. Before we start the session, I'm just going to run through a couple of housekeeping points. The first is that everyone, apart from myself, Neil and Mark, are muted during the session. So if you do have any problems or questions, please do send them in through the Q&A box, and I'll look to get any issues sorted as best I can, and we'll also hopefully have some time at the end of the session to run through some of your questions in a Q&A. Other things to note, we are recording the session and this will be made available afterwards, so if you have any colleagues or peers who you think would find this session interesting, then please do forward that recording on. We are going to also run a poll in a moment's time, and I'll describe what to do then, but it should be very simple and a box will appear in your console, but I'll explain that when we get to it. Okay, so now to introduce our two speakers for today. So our first speaker, who will run through an overview of MSP and give a little bit of context to the second part of the session. This gentleman is Mark Percy. Mark specialises in helping both individuals and organisations manage projects and programmes more effectively, with a specific focus on the Prince2 and MSP methods. Before becoming an instructor and a consultant in 2004, Mark spent over 12 years as a project and program manager in the IT industry. Our second speaker is Neil Aldridge. Neil is a senior program manager with over 20 years of experience delivering business transformation based around IT for blue chip FMCG and oil and gas companies across the world, and he is currently between contract and consultancy work. So, hopefully a box will have appeared in your console with this is the only poll that we're running today, but we want to just give our speakers a bit of an insight into who's joined us on the line today. So if you could respond into the question, which is, what is your job, role or function? Is it I suppose, and we're speaking in general terms here, would you generally consider yourself a program manager, a project manager, someone who works more in an operational environment, someone who specialises in IT, or from a consultancy background, or is your function outside of those and falls within other? So I'll just give everyone a little bit of time to respond to that. So just give everyone another 10 seconds, and thank you to those of you who have already responded. So I'm just going to close it now. Okay, great. So thank you to everyone who's responded. So just over half of the people on the line today are project managers. We've got about 15% are program managers, and the next biggest is consultant and another at 12%. So thank you for responding to that. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over things to Mark.
Okay, good afternoon everybody. My name is Mark Percy. I'm just going to run through a very brief overview of MSP and just talk about some of the key concepts. Okay, so this first slide is really just showing you where MSP fits in. I saw from the poll that a lot of you are project managers, so I assume you may be familiar with Prince. Prince2, Prince stands for Projects in Controlled Environments, and that's what you would be using to run a project. You can see that at the bottom of the diagram here. Within a project, you would have a project board, and on the project board, the key roles are executive, senior user, and senior supplier. So the executive represents the business, senior user would represent whoever's affected by the project, and senior supplier is really who's committing resources to build whatever you're building. So the deliverables, in Prince they call them products. So on the project board, the executive then would be the interface with the program board. So program management is covered by MSP, and on the program board you would have a program manager. Certainly if it's an important project to the program, then the executive of the project board may also be the program manager. So think of them as roles rather than individuals. You don't need separate individuals necessarily. You would also have a business change manager. So the business change manager role, that represents the areas that are affected by the program. So for instance, if you were providing a program, maybe you were going to, your program was to make the HR department more efficient. So there could be a number of projects involved in that. Maybe you've got one project to put in a new IT system. Maybe there's another project to take on more staff. Maybe there's another project to make the existing staff more effective. So maybe there's a big training project going on. So all of those projects together would be affecting the HR department. So the HR manager maybe would be your BCM. Okay, and certainly if you're affecting a number of different business areas, you could have a number of business change managers, BCMs. So we said we've got a program manager managing the program. We've also got one or more BCMs. And the overall decision maker on the program board is what we call the SRO, the Senior Responsible Owner. And the Senior Responsible Owner would provide the interface to the sponsoring group, which you can see at the top of this diagram here. So within an organisation, if a number of projects are all focused on the same overall objective, they may be managed as a programme of work, and certainly that's where MSP comes in. Along the side of this diagram, you can see the PMO box. So PMO stands for Programme Management Office. There is a methodology called P3O that Excelcius also maintain. And the P3, P stands for Portfolio, Programme and Project, and then the O stands for Offices. So if you've got a need to centralise a lot of the functions from the portfolio, the programme and the project level, you may centralise that via a PMO. Okay, so MSP, as I say, sits above Prince. You can see Prince Agile is on there as well. If you're specifically managing Agile types projects, then Prince Agile comes into its own as well. Okay, so taking this a little bit further then, you can see this diagram here is showing you the business drivers. So at the top here, you can see some strategic drivers for the business. So you may have some political drivers. You may have some political drivers. So for instance, I mean, at the moment, for instance, if you think of if you're a government organisation, a lot of stuff that you're doing could be driven by, or there could be a lot of concern about Brexit and the effect that that's going to have on your programme. You could have some economic drivers, so it could be a need to save money. Sociological, we'll run through them all in detail, but it could be the way that people expect to interface with you now. For instance, nowadays they may be using more different ways of interfacing, like Facebook, for instance. Some of that could overlap with technological, obviously, and then you may have some legal and some environmental drivers. So as a business, you may be looking at all of those areas and thinking which direction your business is going in, and that would then allow you to form your strategies. So this could be done at the portfolio level, and what the portfolio then do would be prioritising the programs based on which drivers are most important to the business. So MSP comes in really from the third box downwards. Okay, so your SRO, as I say, would be an interface with the sponsoring group, and the sponsoring group would be giving guidance on which direction the program should be going in. So MSP would then come into its own. You can see also further down that diagram you've got the projects delivering. That's where Prince comes in, but this is why you would want Prince, the executive on the project board, to be interfaced with the program board to make sure they're aligned. And then the second from last box, this is really the area that separates a project from a program. Or programs are much more about making sure things are transitioned smoothly into a live environment. So if we come back to our original example of trying to make the HR department more efficient, If you've got an IT project going on and it's not really interfacing significantly with the training project or the project to take on more important staff, then if all of those projects aren't being managed together, you're not going to get a joined up solution. So the transitioning piece is very key. This is really where the business change managers come in. So the program manager is managing the projects, making sure they're delivered appropriate with the program, with the objectives of the overall program, but the BCMs need to make sure the transition is going smoothly. Okay. So this slide really is just summarising some of the areas that we need to align with within MSP. We need to worry about that corporate strategy, so any of those business drivers would be important. So if they change, then the program needs to change to reflect that. Delivery mechanisms for change, so BCMs come in making sure that we're transitioning into a live environment, and obviously the business as usual environment. What we don't want to happen is that we're affecting business as usual too much during the transition. So business as usual needs to continue in parallel with the program. Okay, this next diagram is talking about predictability of outcome. I wouldn't worry too much about the real detail of this diagram, but what it's trying to illustrate here is that there's not a one-size-fits-all in terms of how you would run MSP. Certainly on the left-hand side of the diagram, you've got some high predictability deliverables here. So, for instance, they talk about the Olympic Park. That's a big construction output, really. You could manage that really with a scaled-down version of MSP. You could almost run that as a big project, because there's not really, while the park's being built, there's not really a lot of interface with the public. And if you remember the communications around the Olympic Park, it was all about making sure that things were coming in on time and on budget. Okay, so that's really project characteristics. But the further you get towards the right-hand side of the diagram, so the lower the predictability, the more value MSP is going to add. So you can see on the right there, if you've got pioneering engineering techniques, there's going to be a lot of talk around making sure the stakeholders are buying into those engineering techniques, making sure it's being transitioned in smoothly. You can see there's some stuff around business transformation, so new products into new markets. Again, you can see a lot of stakeholder engagement there, making sure people are buying into the changes. And you can see at the bottom there, political and societal change. Certainly if you're changing the way that people are viewing health, for instance, again, going to be adding more value because there's less predictability, therefore there needs to be a lot more communication, making sure people are on board. So what we need to make sure with that when we're looking at MSP is that we're adding value. We'll look at the principles in a minute, and one of those is adding value. If we're not adding value, then we're just adding cost. So you saw earlier we were talking about the fact that you've got a program board sitting above the project board. If that program board isn't adding value, then we've got to pay for those people. It may not be viable to treat it as a program. We may just say, let's run a project. Okay, this is just a summary of projects versus programs. So again, I'm just going to pick on a few key points here. Projects, we said, are driven by deliverables, so it could be a new IT system, whereas programs will be driven by the vision of an end state. So a vision of end state could be we need to make our department much more efficient in the future. Projects are finite, defined start and finish. Programs, they say no predefined path. There would be a bit of a predefined path, but it wouldn't be so clear. So one thing that we don't always have in a vision, for instance, at the program level, is things like target dates. Certainly the projects would all have their target dates, but at the program level, we need to make sure the vision stays consistent. So if we start to put very detailed dates in there and we miss those dates, then people start to lose faith in the program. To give you an example of that, if you were talking about Heathrow, what they're trying to do with Heathrow, for instance, is be a hub for European flights. So if you imagine the projects within that program, you may be putting in a new runway, new terminal buildings, all of those would have target dates. But in terms of when we're going to be a hub for European flights, that's going to be dependent on how many people use the airport, and you know, the other types of transport that they may be using, that may be competing with it, and so on. So it's very difficult to put a date around that. Okay, you can see all of these. Obviously, the last one is fairly obvious on the diagram here. Projects are a shorter timescale. Programs are a longer timescale. Okay, so just to put that all together, this is an overview of how MSP is structured. They call this in the MSP manual the 3 core concepts. So around the outside here, you've got the principles. Okay, so these are rules and guidelines that you'd follow on every program. So for instance, you can see one of them is remaining aligned with corporate strategy. So we said we've got our business drivers that we need to remain aligned with. If any of those drivers change, we need to make sure that the program is aligned. And the main role that makes sure we're aware of any changes to corporate strategy, we said, is the SRO, the Senior Responsible Owner. You can see, again, I'm just going to pick on a few here. Adding value we talked about. If we're not adding value, then as I say, we're just adding. So if there aren't reasons to run things as a program, we may just run a big project. So it's not just about the size of things, it's about the nature of the work we're doing. If there's a lot of stakeholder engagement, if there's a lot of convincing people about the business transformation we're doing, then MSP is going to be adding more value. You know, if you can decide some of the others are things like leading change, meaning to make sure people are buying into the change, envisioning, communicating a better future, and so on. So you can see, those of you that have done print, you'll remember the principles are much more about continued business justification, and making sure the project is justified, and the learning from experience is obviously consistent. But you can see there's a lot more focus here on stakeholder engagement, making sure people are buying into the change. So they're the principles. They're, as I say, rules or guidelines we'd follow in every program. The middle blue ring is the themes. So these are the subject areas that we need to cover on a program. Sometimes people think of a theme like a theme of a film. It would run all the way through. So if a film was a comedy, that theme would run all the way through a film. In the same way, the vision should run all the way through a program. That's one of the themes. You can see organisation. We talked about the roles. They would be discussed there. Again, I'm not going to go through them all in detail. I know Neil is going to talk about some of these in relation to a specific program. And then in the middle there, you've got the transformational flow. So these are the processes that we would go through to get things done. So you can see some of them identifying a program. That's really making sure we've got a tangible business concept before we go forward. Then defining a program is planning things in more detail. The next 3 processes would have times depending on how many tranches we've got. So think of a tranche as a slice of a program. So we may have a number of slices, and what we try and do is align each slice with a step change in capability. So maybe the first slice of the program, we're going to get the department up and running. Maybe the next slice of the program could be the sales department, and so on. So you could do it department by department, for instance. And you can see the 3 processes there. You've got managing the tranches, which sort of oversees the tranche, making sure it's aligned with things that are going on externally, for instance. Delivering the capabilities, where the program manager is making sure the projects are on track. Realizing the benefits is much more where the business change managers look at transitioning into a live environment. So those 3 processes would repeat a number of times depending on how many tranches we have. And then at the end of a program, obviously you'd close it down formally. That's where closing a program comes in. That's assuming everything's gone smoothly. If things had gone wrong, we could prematurely close, but we'd still go through the closing a program process. So as I say, that's how MSP is structured. That's referred to in the manual as the 3 core concepts. Okay, so that's a very brief overview of MSP. Now I'll hand over to Neil Aldridge, who's going to talk about a specific program.
Thank you for that, Mark. That was a very good overview of MSP, and really good to have that presented and put things into context. So what I'm going to talk about today is a program that I managed. I've been a program manager for over 20 years and a advanced MSP practitioner for the last 10. And I'm certified in MSP, Prince 2, P3O, Change Management and ITIL. So I'm going to talk about specifically what the program was like when I took it over, and then what I did using the MSP framework. Right. So the example, just a second, right, I'm done. Right, my role on this one was program manager, and myself and a few others in the company had studied MSP, and we'd become advanced practitioners. But within the company, we were a minority, and the corporate standard was to use the company's project methodology framework. But providing we complied with the in-house methodology checklists and reporting, we had a free hand as to how to deliver our programs by whatever approach we thought most appropriate. Therefore, I was able to tailor my work to comply with the corporate project framework requirements, yet at the same time run things to MSP. So this particular program, a colleague set it up, and then he decided to retire, possibly when he realised the size of the programs. Anyway, I've helped him to retire and to take on the work, and I started off by assessing, or informally auditing, exactly what I'd taken on, and I did this against the MSP Principles, which you see listed here in the table. This was really important, and you don't get any other message from my presentation. Take this one bit. If you take over a program of work, start by doing an assessment of what you've inherited and do it against the principles. The key thing with the principles is it covers all the aspects that you need to run a program, and principles are something that you can talk to senior management about, which are not emotional, but they are key items that management will align to. That nobody in management will look at this lot and say, oh no, that's not what we want to do. But if you can do your assessment against them, it's a really good starting point for any work you take on. So let's look at exactly what was this program that I took on. Okay, it seems we've lost a slide. I'll give the overview to the program before we come on to this one. So the example that I'm just going to talk about is from a major global business. It's one I've got the utmost respect for. I worked for them for many years, and I worked with very different and quite diverse divisions within this company. The particular division we're talking about sells drinks and vending machines to companies and has a multi-million-dollar turnover. Their main sales and manufacturing units are in the UK, France, Germany, and the US. And this division hadn't had a significant IT-based investment for a number of years. So the board decided to implement SAP across the 4 countries. The scope was extremely broad, and it was scheduled to be defined and then deployed over a number of years. The scope was firstly global finance to be put in everywhere, and then sales systems and delivery logistics across each country. This included customer relationship management, CRM, web sales, field service, business intelligence, so forth. And then after this, finally, the manufacturing and purchasing systems would be updated. So it was a big program. The budget was large, many millions, and key to the business's future growth through better customer service and process efficiencies. The work was seen as a program because it was multiple IT projects, not because it needed to be managed differently. This was a challenge because at that time the business executed both their projects and their programs using their in-house project framework. So, coming on to the first principle that I looked at, and this is envisaging and communicating a better future. There were several areas of the programme that weren't aligned. One, the fact that it was called a programme because it was multiple projects, not because MSP was used. The scope boundaries were not clearly defined. So you had multiple departments trying to squeeze work into the scope. Most of you will be familiar with this. The project or programme is live. Everyone else will try and throw their scope in because that's where the money's going. The key roles didn't have any job descriptions, and as a consequence, no assessment of the training needs for the people in those roles. And the stakeholder lists were basically email distribution lists for blanket updates. There wasn't a stakeholder management plan. So, key messages regarding this principle. The roles and responsibilities need to be clear. Stakeholder management is a key early and it's an ongoing activity. And the MSP approach is needed for programs to avoid multiple risks to delivery. We now look at benefits. Absolutely key principle and reason why we're doing the programs. Again, several areas not aligned. The benefits, to get this straight, the benefits were defined and they were aligned to corporate strategy, but the benefit strategy accountability was not in the objectives of the senior responsible owner. The benefit delivery had been assigned to individuals, but there was no benefit profiles and there were no benefit delivery plans. And if you don't have a profile, you don't have a plan, what are you going to measure? How will you know you've got there, etc. The programme was seen as consecutive projects that were independent, and it didn't have any tranches in the plan. And tranches are aligned to benefits in MSP, and there's no clarity at all of intercompany or intercountry dependencies. Also, the programme duration was underestimated because it focused on projects and not the outcomes. What that meant was there was limited business resource to design and then to stay with the end users and help to embed the change. The assumption had been that the design team would just move from one template onto the next one and not actually have to stay and do the embedment. This is a real common problem in programs, and particularly if you do it as a series of projects. The business case asked for funds to build a global software solution template before starting any deployment or rollouts. This was also a big mistake. If you just wait forever to build the perfect template, then you really delay the benefits and the buy-in of those who are late in the rollout. But there's also a risk that the board give up before it's ever deployed because they just see money going out and nothing coming back. So, key messages again. On this one, it's really on the benefits. Have a strategy, have profiles, have plans. Ensure the roles and responsibilities are clear. You will need business resources in place to deliver the capability and the outcomes. So think about the challenge between a team that learns about what the business needs and helps to create it, and how that knowledge or team also does the embedment. And what does that mean to the actual overall rollout if you're doing repeated deployments? It's a key issue, and it's analogous to the challenge between waterfall development and agile. Do you do something completely and then deploy it, or do you do lots of quick wins in small stages? But debating that out the scope of this program. The final point is, on your plans, show times to do end of tranche reviews. The original plans didn't have any. So there was an assumption that as soon as one deployment was finished, the team would immediately start work on the next one. And that's not realistic. you need time to stop and reflect, go through the end of project review, look at the benefits that you are delivering, what opportunities have arisen, and what you want to learn going forward, how you want to adapt going forward. You also need to give the team a chance to have a holiday. So you need to show tranches, you need to show holidays on the plans. Another principle, we're going to go through 5 of these altogether. This one is delivering a coherent capability. Again, areas not aligned. The fact that this program was a collection of projects and therefore little coherence. There was no blueprint. The program management meetings were ad hoc, and therefore the program reporting was ad hoc. What this then meant was the information was not being generated in sync with day-to-day operational meetings or monthly board meetings. So although the SRO was on the corporate board, they were not getting timely information to take to the board meetings. So it was very difficult for the programme to remain aligned to the corporate objectives. And there were no points in the programme plan for review of benefits. Now, one thing I must make clear about this point is, whilst these are criticisms of this particular programme at the point of take on, it was very big, very complex. This is a major multinational company, and it is a great company. It employs high caliber people, and they made projects a success without MSP. Following this and other programs, they do now use MSP, but if they'd used it sooner, they would have delivered more. So if we look at the key messages associated with the coherent capability, the coherent capability comes from timely and accurate information being used by empowered and capable teams. Set up calendars of meetings to enable your key stakeholders to manage their attendance, and set up a periodic or monthly reporting structure that aligns to the corporate reporting cycle. So the information from reviews of individual projects can then feed into programme reviews and up to the programme board, and onto, if necessary, the corporate board. This timely, concise upwards communication flow will ensure that you get continued board support, and it also means if there are issues that are occurring, the board is seeing on the horizon, then you can get timely feedback. And we did on this particular programme. This was occurring during the recession that occurred in the banking industry crash a few years ago, and we got advance warning that there was going to be impacts on business cash flow and therefore program cash flow, and we were able to take time to minimise the disruption because we had that heads up and close link to the board. But you only get that sort of link if you are giving timely information. If you give timely information, good information, then you stand a better chance of getting it back. The other thing is very important. You must have a blueprint. It's key for scope management. Tranches are absolutely key. They need to be a liability and benefit delivery, and they were added into the plans. And I introduced the concept of end of tranche reviews into the organisation. By the way, the benefit realisation management would have focused on assessing the right point for the end of tranche review if we'd have had the benefit profiles, etc., which I mentioned earlier. So all these things link together. If we come to then the principle of adding value, there was multiple missing programme documentation. Important thing to note, you do not need to have documentation that is reams and reams of paper sat on a shelf that nobody reads. You need to tailor it to the organisation and to the size of the piece of work you're doing, but it's important you have it. Things that were missing were the strategies, the plans, the registers, the blueprint, the project dossier. There was a risk register, but it wasn't being used properly. The SRO didn't understand their responsibility to log risks, and key ones associated with turnover at the precedent level were missed. Because these were missing, and because stakeholders weren't reviewing them, scope was drifting, and stakeholders, as a consequence, were doubting the ability of the team to deliver. This was all at the point of when I was doing the audit. It was also not formally defined how the programme would be monitored and controlled, and as the board weren't getting good information up with clear options and recommendations, the guidance coming back was limited. So, key messages: creating and using the programme documentation increases the probability of the programme adding value. All the documents have a value, but do tailor them for the size of the programme, the company culture, the industry sector. Programme management should use documentation to ensure that everything, including the boundaries, is aligned to realising the end benefits. And a programme needs to be monitored and controlled with a meeting structure aligned to the business management control structure. And to the final principle I'll talk of now, and this is leading change. Again, several areas not aligned. The corporate board believes that the SRO and the business change manager owned the programme. The reason for this was that they had worked with stakeholders to ensure their engagement and to get sign-off on an internal business case. But as a result, the board didn't understand that they, the board, should own the outcomes. The business team was recruited from keen, really enthusiastic volunteers at the business headquarters. Great people, but as is quite common when large programmes recruit business resource, these people were new to programmes. So they needed training and they needed time to become the right people to lead the change. Because they came from HQ, they didn't represent all the business units, and they weren't frequent travellers like the IT individuals and the third-party suppliers. So they expected those individuals to always come to them rather than sharing the travel workload. The lack of MSP awareness amongst the programme board was an ongoing issue throughout the programme. Having started in that manner, it was very hard to find a good opportunity to educate them, which was something which put more workload back onto me, steering them, explaining things and managing them. And we addressed change management, but at that time I hadn't had formal training. And if you haven't done change management, I strongly encourage you to do so. It is absolutely a sort of third leg of a stool of project management, programme management. Change management comes in there very much to help things happen with people. So, key messages on this one. Coherent capability and transformational change comes from timely and accurate information being used by empowered and capable teams. A formal resource management strategy should look at developing resources versus recruiting them. But when a team's co-located, consider the travel impact and the work-life balance for those not based at the site. And those of you on the call who do travel will know the challenges of people expecting to see folk 5 days a week on site and for travel to be done outside of that. It's something that has to be addressed, and you have to do it up front. You have to make clear what the ground rules are. Key roles such as business change manager really should have some MSP training. A tailored overview would have helped them, and it would have helped the programme board in this case. Also to note, some countries are less aware of MSP. My line manager was French, and he reported to an American, and neither had MSP awareness. And as I've mentioned, change management practitioner, very helpful for those designing and delivering programs. So to conclude, get any problems sorted out at the start. Audit any project or program you take over. If it's a program, then get MSP in place at the start. This particular division hadn't had a major program for many years. An audit should have been conducted before the business had engaged with SAP and actually committed to do the spend, not when I came along afterwards. If the sponsoring group is working to MSP, then there should be just demonstrable support for the program through making appropriate resources available. If you see problems with resources there, then that's a bit of a clue that they haven't really signed on, or there are other fundamental issues needing addressing. You should find senior management that are working to MSP visible, building and promoting a program management culture. Again, if you don't, why is that? If you use MSP from the start and set up the program correctly, you should get roles and responsibilities defined correctly, job specifications that you can use for team recruitment, and gap analysis as to what the training requirements are, and if people need buddies, etc. And also it will help you to size the team correctly for the type of work and for the pace. Using MSP here, it rescued the program and it put in place the structure that enabled a plan to be put in place that was achievable, and we delivered. We achieved the desired outcomes. The program transformed the business, and that has enabled profitable growth. Very, very good business. All the people involved continue to work in programs, and MSP is now widely used in the company. And that concludes the presentation. So,
okay.
I'll hand back to Tom.
Thanks, Neil, for that, and thanks, Mark, for your session earlier. As the slide says, please do send in any questions you have for us, and we'll look to get those answered. I just want to reiterate what I said at the beginning. We are recording this session, and that will be available at the same link that you registered from. So please do forward that on to anyone who you think would find today's session interesting. And also, we will be making the slides available on SlideShare. So we've had a couple of questions come in. The first one I'm going to direct at yourself, Mark. How should MSP be used in an agile environment?
Okay, that's something that people commonly ask actually in my teaching sessions. I mean, certainly from an agile perspective, an agile team has a structure, but there is always a danger with an agile team because they're to a certain extent self-managing, that they can steer things in a direction that maybe isn't appropriate to the business as a whole. So if we come back to the principles that we were talking about, things like remaining aligned with corporate strategy, that's still very key. Certainly we need to make sure the stakeholder engagement is often handled from an MSP perspective as well. I mean, if you think of how communications go at a project level, which is where agile really is mainly focused, your stakeholder engagement may be inviting people along for testing, that sort of thing, but at the MSP level, we need to make sure the business as a whole is buying into the change we're implementing. So leading change is important, envisioning, communicating a better future. So what I'm getting to really is that you may have a structure in place for agile. There's also obviously a Prince Agile methodology that shows you where Prince interfaces with the Agile projects. But MSP is still very important if you need to make sure things are aligned with the business as a whole. So you'd still need a program board. On the program board, you've got your SRO, who's our link to the corporate environment. You'd still need a program manager, making sure that all the projects, maybe they're being run using Agile, maybe making sure that all the projects are still aligning with the overall capability. You still need business change managers, making sure that whatever we are delivering is important to the business. But again, some of these roles may end up being combined. So, for instance, at the Agile level, you have often you have a product owner who's looking at making sure the solution is what the user community need. There needs to be a line of communication between the product owner and the business change manager. And if it's a very important change, then it could be the same person taking on both roles. So what I'm really coming to is Agile has its place, but if you're part of a larger environment, MSP, you still need that overall management structure to make sure you're delivering what's important to the business. Is that okay? I don't know whether there's anything you want to add from the case study perspective. Neil, did you come across Agile in that program at all, or?
Yes, we did, and we had a mixture because some of the projects were traditional waterfall. So things like the SAP going live was a big cutover, but then adding in functionality was done on a monthly basis. When we applied some of the hot fixes, we would add in bits of change at that time. So there would be reports that would be added in to the monthly cycle. There was also things like a web shop that was produced, and that again was enhanced on a regular basis. So different projects within the program portfolio had different approaches.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Neil. So we've had another question come in around, you mentioned around documentation and not needing, reams and reams of documentation on the shelves. So as part of this program that you worked on, did you find yourself having to cut down the level of documentation? And if so, do you have any tips or advice on how to achieve that?
Yes, for a lot of things, if you want to keep it simple, just use Excel. You don't need to have massive tools. You need to have things that are at a level that people can understand. So your risk and issues can be done on simple spreadsheets. The plans at a high level can be done in PowerPoint. As far as the program board's concerned, they will be looking at things on more of a monthly basis than individual days. You might want to use Microsoft Project for individual projects, but if you're looking at things at the program level, a Excel plan might be sufficient. So sometimes just the choice of tools can constrain you, and the summary of what you're delivering can be done as quite short descriptions with the documentation that describes the process being used for the scope and also for the training and for the support. So you actually grow that piece of documentation and use it for the handover to the support teams. So those are ways that you can actually tailor things to keep them smaller. Conversely, when I was working on a program in oil and gas, if the blueprint first version was over 200 pages. So that was just version 1, but that was enhanced as we went along, and that was necessary because of the complexity of what we were doing and the level of detail that the customers wanted to check before they were comfortable with proceeding through gates.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Neil. So we've had one question come in. What courses are available for change management? Are there any that you'd recommend? So at Excelcius ourselves do not offer a course in change management, but Mark, Neil, I don't know if you had any that you would recommend or suggest people research in a little more detail.
Yeah, I mean, if you want a specific change management qualification, there is the APM group offer a qualification. If you just go to www.apmg-international.com, you'll see that there's a qualification there, or if you just type in APMG change management into Google, I think it'll come up as well. Anything that you're aware of, Neil? Or?
Yes, that's the one that I did. I did that with Pierce Mayfield, and it's a very good course. And there are other things which are linked to it, such as stakeholder management, but certainly that's a very good one for the awareness of what change management is all about. And then later on, you may want to get into using specific frameworks like Closely and other things. But that course for me was a real eye-opener. It caused me to reflect a lot during the course about things that had happened in the past, and it explained things which as to why certain projects have gone certain ways. So I find it invaluable.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. The next question we've had come in. Neil, I'm going to direct this at you first and then open it out to Mark. But what steps would you recommend to help encourage an executive team to buy into MSP?
The way I did it on the last major program was to start off by talking to people in the business about their experiences of previous programs, what was good and also what was bad. And having got that as the principles of within our business, this is how things work or don't work, then I was able to go back and say, right, this is what I'm getting from internally, what we need to do, and this actually aligns to MSP and these things. I didn't use the word MSP for a long time, and just actually put in place, this is what we're going to do based on the learnings, and they signed on to that. And then later on, they kept saying, oh yes, we want to do this again. And they weren't really cognizant that they were using MSP until quite late. So it was really get them to talk about their own business. Don't go and say MSP is best practice, therefore you must do. Actually start with within your business and your industry, what works and doesn't work. It makes it much more real to them and much more credible, because then you're actually playing back to them what they and their senior people are telling you, rather than trying to impose something external.
Mark, I don't know if you had any additional comments on that.
Well, just really to emphasise what Neil was saying about what you don't want to do is try and follow everything in the manual from the beginning. I mean, it's meant to be tailored anyway. And as Neil was saying, if you just say, well, we're going to do MSP, and then you try and make a wholesale change from the beginning, then people are going to push back. Whereas if you can bring in small changes, as Neil said, don't maybe even talk about it being MSP to start with, then people are more likely to buy into the concepts, because all of it makes sense when you start to run things using a program. It's all tried and tested, but people are naturally resistant to change. Something else that you may want to do, I mean, certainly on the Excelcius website there's a case studies section, and I think it's always good if you can show people successful programs that have been run using MSP. So senior management always like to see how other people have done it. So I think that's a good way to get people on board as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mark. The final question that we've had come in that we're able to answer today is one for you, Neil. It says that the resource, so people allocation for each project in the program, did you do it on the project level or at the program level?
I did it at both. What I did was every 4 weeks had a project day, and the business relationship manager and myself sat down for that day with each of the individual projects, and the team would come in for about 20 minutes, half an hour, and just present what were their sort of top concerns, what was their progress against plan, etc. and we'd have an open, relaxed discussion about what they were facing and what it was that they needed from us. And we did this for every single project, and we included our business partners, SAP, in this as well. They sat in, and also some other companies that we were using to help. So we had the senior people from our suppliers there, and after lunch, once we'd finished going through all the areas, we would then sit down and look at the themes that were coming out and see if we needed to make adjustments. So individual teams we had set up with our assumption as to who was going to be working on what, and if they were in more than one area, how much time they were getting on each. But once we'd got that feedback during that day, we would then reflect, did we need to reallocate people or bring in extra people or even adjust the scope? And then we would bring the whole team back in together later in the day and feed back to them a summary of what we'd heard from each area and what we, as the programme leads, proposed to do about it. And that way, at the end of the day, the individual projects knew where they were heading. In some cases, it was, this is what we propose to do. We're going to go to the programme board and request that we spend money on this, or we do that, or we need to look at changing things and take it up to the sponsoring group. But nevertheless, that was the approach we did. So we started off with people assigned to projects, but we adjusted it as we went along, and we had this formal every 4 weeks where people knew they had the opportunity to come and talk to us. Clearly, we're available outside of that, but the 4-week point was a good time to just step back and look across everything.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for those all those answers, Neil, and thank you both for presenting on today's session. I think it's been really interesting, and I hope that everyone who's joined would agree with me. So without further ado, thank you everyone for joining, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.